Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. If this is your first time here, this is a podcast about political commentary, protest music, and revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co-host, MysterE. So, MysterE, how are you going today?
I am very well, 4IS. How are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty good, and we've gotten back into the movies. This week, we're going to do Chicken Run.
Yeah, and we're going to do it justice. It's a very, very entertaining movie, one with a lot of underlying revolutionary and anti-capitalist notions, I believe.
Yes, because really, I think the influence, or at least the initial surface influence of it, is the Great Escape. It's very obvious from the chickens, where obviously they're in the chicken coop, but because of the high fence, Mr. Tweedy with the dogs, with the guard dogs and everything, it's very reminiscent of the Great Escape, like basically like a POW camp, if you will.
Yeah, but it's not like a prison break type of escape.
No.
This is like more of an escape from your servitude, like escaping your means of existence and seeking a better life, which is why I think it has true revolutionary undertones. And it's very important for discussion on the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. Like the whole framework of the movie is about the idea of like envisaging a better life and knowing that the grass is greener. They make that reference a lot. And then trying to have that manifest like within their struggle. And like it's not just like a prison, they're not just prisoners who are aimlessly walking around, waiting for death kind of thing. Though death is an element in it that plays a big part in the story. They are workers.
Yes.
And it's kind of the evolution of their work, which happens kind of throughout the movie, where they kind of have to produce something for their masters. When then, as the story develops, they actually become, part of the production process ultimately, as the capitalist forces, invest in newer machinery and technological development, and then it like kind of just becomes blatantly obvious that they are the commodity, and like they will just kind of be served up for the higher power.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because really at the very start of the film, when we're introduced to Ginger, and she's just doing her and Mac are basically doing escape plan after escape plan after escape plan. It's all very whimsical, but then there's two moments in probably the beginning, the beginning third of the movie, which really establish it as a revolutionary tale. Now, the first one is, Edwina dying. So we're shown in their camp, or their chicken coop, that effectively their contribution to the means of production is obviously laying eggs and all of that. But we are shown that Mrs. Tweedy obviously keeps track of how many eggs are being laid, blah, blah, blah. And then we're shown that they have to line up, and that Edwina had not laid eggs for an entire week. And we're led to believe that she's barren. And literally, Mrs. Tweedy grabs her, takes her out back of the shed, and chops her head off.
Yeah, it's quite a confronting scene as well for a children's movie, I must say. Yeah, very in your face.
Yeah, and like it's a very revolutionary point of, you're basically a cog in the machine, and as soon as you're of no use anymore to the farmer in this case, or to the machine, if you will, of capitalism, you are just spat out, and you're of no use anymore.
Yeah. And so like unproductive members of society, people that like, maybe they're in the workforce, but like they don't serve a purpose, are basically taken out of the system and left to die, or they're like literally killed, like in this movie it's suggesting they're food for someone else. Like I think she ends up on the dinner table, like you see later, like her carcass and all that sort of stuff, because she's been literally consumed by her capitalist overlords and stuff like that.
Again, you're leading into my next point is, actually in that scene when you see after Edwina's killed and she's basically served on the dinner table, you see Mrs. Tweedy going through the numbers, crunching the numbers, and then this leads on to the rest of the story where she's like, oh, we're not making enough to ends meet. Why are we just laying laying eggs? Like, why are we making these minuscule profits?
Minuscule profits.
Yes, it's a very specific phrase that is like way too specific for a Great Escape story. And she looks on the table, and we're shown a much more efficient means of creating the means of production, which was to create chicken pies. So from them laying eggs, we've now been forced into a story which the chickens go from, I guess, creating food to being the food, which was it's not subtle at all.
And there's some like very kind of poignant messages there from like an understanding of like capitalism, or an analysis or critique of capitalism, or even just to look at it from its historical development. So you have kind of like a very, very blatant look there from the idea that capitalism came out of feudalism. So it came out of like basically agricultural production into proper industrial capitalism. So you have literally the farmers, so like Mr. and Mrs. Tweedy, and then they're like living off the land workers who kind of produce things literally from their own creation. They literally the chickens are creating eggs, like I guess very primitive kind of capitalist societies where you have workers or artisans or people with specific skills that are creating things with their own body, and using their own intuition and all that sort of stuff to produce for somebody else, but they're still invested in the process. It's part of them. They're not detached or alienated from it at some point. They have a lot of ownership on it. It's their eggs. You can see how much they value eggs when they're like negotiating with the rats. Like they don't want to just give up eggs for anyone. They're still quite attached to their production. And then like as the capitalist kind of, progression happens, you're moving away from that classic farm or agricultural model to literally having an industry brought on site, an industrial powerhouse, this amazing, pie making machine. And they're completely alienated from their labor anymore. They've got nothing. It's got nothing to do with what they're creating. They're just a commodity now that gets fed into the machine with some vegetables and gravy, and they spit out the other end as a chicken pie. And so like that kind of transition from like owning your labor and producing for someone / that kind of rustic and romantic form of early capitalist production into proper full-scale industrial production is the story of Chicken Run, like right there. And so you have, like you were saying, the Tweedies, who are like these kind of primitive capitalists. They're understanding that if they invest in the technology, they invest in the means of production, the constant capital, as Marx would call it, you can get more productive forces out of your workforce. You get more production power, out of your workforce, and that means more profit. But like it's completely making the workforce expendable at that point. Like,
well, yeah, but I would argue that probably Mr. Tweedy is probably the more of a feudal lord, or at least much more attached to the tradition, because like he keeps on saying it's like, oh, my father was a chicken farmer, and my father before that was a chicken farmer, and this is just the way you kind of do things. You let the chickens lay eggs, you collect their eggs, and then you sell it at market. But I wonder if you appreciate this perspective of things. I think that Mrs. Tweedy is far more ambitious, and that um, she's basically a Margaret Thatcher figure, because she's the one who discovers the pie making machine, and to make the means of production a lot more efficient. And she, like, these sort of new ideas, like, it's her idea to be Mrs. Tweedy's pies, because presenting capitalism in this sort of way, with a woman's touch, is good for business and all of that. Like, I kind of feel like she's a bit of a Margaret Thatcher Iron Lady figure. But
yeah, I appreciate that. I'll take that.
Yeah. I think I've been thinking about that interpretation over the last couple of weeks. But I think another really important thing that this movie actually does quite well is the other chickens, apart from Ginger, who's the protagonist, and obviously her right-hand lady, which is Mac, the Scottish chicken. Everyone else... Yeah, well, yes. And everyone else seems incredibly complacent at the beginning, and also you have that kind of individualist mindset of, is like, oh, it's a decent life just to lay eggs and just have our way of life. It's basically the start of the story. People are like, the kind of capitalism that they're influenced by. It's very behind the scenes. It kind of melds in with their day-to-day life, and the chickens don't really see anything that wrong with it. Compared to Ginger, who keeps on saying, like, no, there has to be a better life, grass is always greener on the other side, which again goes back to those Mark's talking points that I found was quite interesting.
Yeah. And like, it's really interesting how, like, there's a part, like a scene where she's kind of fantasizing about what it's like, out of the chicken coop, or out of their kind of their prison yard, or their POW kind of camp looking environment. And she's talking about the fact that she's never felt grass under her feet. And so, like, that's another kind of large, I guess you would say, critique of capitalism, where it kind of severs, like, the people that are involved with it from nature. And there's, like, no connection to the natural world anymore, and everything becomes kind of this production line. But like, the characters that you were talking about before, how they kind of seem complacent and, like, happy with their lot in life and all of that sort of stuff. I think that is a good kind of message or theme to run with, because they're kind of commenting on the fact that most people aren't going to resist, and most people just accept the fact that they're part of the system, or this is just the way that life is, and they're not looking to kind of rebel and seek any type of improvement. It's easier to remain with the status quo. But like, Ginger is, like, I think she alludes to it a number of times, at least in the conversations with Rocky, that, like, she could escape. She could make a better life for herself. It's not about getting one or two chickens out. It's about getting all of them out. And it's constantly about that, which is why this is a truly revolutionary tale, because it's not about just dragging individuals out of, like, this kind of spiral and misfortune. It's more than that. It's about lifting them all together out of that hellhole, and making a better life for all of them, which is very revolutionary. And like, obviously the whole drive behind the movie is about that, is about getting them out as a group and everyone having to band together. And there's a lot of struggle in there and competing interests. You've got that really kind of big and robust chicken. I can't remember what her name is.
Bunty.
Bunty, yeah. But so she's like kind of the antithesis of Ginger in a way. She is, if we're going to talk about like reactionary figures, I would say that she's more of a reactionary figure in the working class, because like she's kind of resistant to any kind of forlorn hopes or like fleeting attempts to try and break out of this system, because at the end of the day, if it's a 1,000,000 to 1 kind of shot, why are you even bothering by like filling people's heads with fantasies and stopping them from laying eggs, which ends up just getting them killed anyway? Living in this fantasy world where you think you're going to change things is dangerous. It's dangerous, and like that is a big issue when it comes to revolution and being anti-capitalist and all that sort of stuff, is convincing other people like you, like, that they are truly against their own class interests by not seeking change and not actively working towards their own betterment. And they struggle with that throughout the whole movie, and I think it's a very important kind of lesson, because at the end of the day, it is a good news story. There's a happy ending and all that sort of stuff, so it was worth it to some degree, or it was massively worth it. But like there are obviously hiccups along the way, sacrifices.
Yes, but there's also different classes of reactionary characters. Like, I think you're right in the sense that Bunty is a very like pragmatist reactionary, in the sense of, as soon as they um hit a roadblock, she'd immediately turn around and be like, "Oh, okay, well, that didn't work. Yeah, there's no point to this anymore." And she would always be a roadblock every single time. Ginger's like, "No, no, 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 don't panic. Like, we can just think through this, and we can just pivot and change our tact." But I'd like to hear your thoughts about Rocky, because he's another interesting reactionary character. Or is he a reactionary character? Because obviously he's a major part of, I guess, the inciting incident, if you will, in the movie of, Ginger has just done her last attempt, and I guess she's at a point where it's like, oh, is there a point to dreaming of a better tomorrow? Are the rest of the chickens right that this is the best we'll ever have? And then suddenly Rocky's flying in the sky, and she can see that, oh, maybe there is a way out. He of course injures his wing, and then there's the whole thing of he's escaping from the circus, and he needs somebody to hide him. And they obviously make the deal of, teach us how to fly, and we can protect you from the circus, and also Mr. and Mrs. Tweedy. And that's when they have the running deal. But like, it's very obvious from the beginning of the story that Rocky is a very like a huge opportunist. Because he's trying to smooth talk the other chickens all the time. Really, the only reason he takes on the deal to begin with is because he wants to hide from the circus. And really, he kind of manipulates this the situation all to the all the way through to, well, I guess the major, like, down moment of the film, when you find out that despite him being a good person and obviously rescuing Ginger from the pie making machine, he was a complete fraud, because he actually didn't know how to fly. And you did raise a good point of, before that, he does discuss with Ginger. He's like, wait, well, you're really smart. Why don't you just take you and your mate Mac and just escape by yourselves? And she's like, well, it's not really about that. It's about getting everyone out. Like, he's an incredibly for a majority of the film, he's an incredibly selfish character.
Yeah.
And he like with his whole speech of, oh, I'm Rocky Road, I'm the Lone Ranger, I I ride out on the road and I only look after myself. Like, he's very much a reactionary character for a majority of the film.
I think he is emblematic of a larger problem with the working class, which is to kind of put their hopes and dreams into kind of someone who represents an ideal, or a way out, and then also to get behind that cult of the personality, having a charismatic leader. So the working class are very happy to like kind of dismiss primarily Ginger because she's kind of at their level and trying to think of things that they can all do together. It's not working all the time, but like she's thinking from the ground up, where Rocky kind of flies in over the fence, literally. And then like he's come from the outside, he's sexy, he's got all these like grand ideas, he's offering them a solution which is far-fetched. Like it's not based in any reality. We know that as the viewer because, he can't actually fly. He's been shot out of a cannon and all that sort of stuff. And like Mac is kind of really struggling with that and contemplating like how it is that he was able to fly, but like without the understanding that he's just an illusion. And everything that he's predicated on is a lie. She's unable to use her intellect to bridge the gap and make that connection and like kind of figure things out. So like it's really important to have that figure there to kind of ground revolutionary aspirations and aspirations for kind of being self-sufficient and having self-determination and all that sort of stuff. If you just put your hopes in somebody else, like especially someone from the outside who has no real reality or connection with your struggle. They're just telling you niceties and like using a lot of flattery and all that sort of stuff to try and, win you over and make you feel good about yourself. But the only like lessons in the struggle that they have really ultimately come from their own experiences when they're trying to hide him, when they begin to kind of train themselves and like, I guess, struggle a little bit more against the powers that be, because they have to coordinate and they have to kind of deal with the rats, and then they have to kind of steal more things in certain points to try and arm themselves for the great escape. But like what Rocky kind of promises as an opportunist, and even as a reactionary, is individualism. He tells them that he can teach them to fly as individuals and they will all fly over the fence. And as long as you at the individual level learn how to fly, you can free yourself. But that's not the point of the story. It's you got to take everyone with you, and this is about doing something together and changing life for everyone. Like let's just say 99% of the chickens do actually learn how to fly, right? They still are escaping as individuals. They'll fly over the fence, and then there's 1% that will be left behind. Well, sorry, you didn't learn how to fly, so you're on your own, kind of thing. And I think it's very important then when they realize that they won't be able to fly naturally. It's not within them to fly, so they have to kind of get over this fact that it's not their physicality which is going to save the day for them. It's not something that's already innate and within them as chickens that is going to save the day. And if they just work on their own kind of, they exercise or something like that and become more fit, that they're just going to be able to fly over the fence and free themselves. They actually have to put their faith in kind of ideas. They have to develop ideas in order to make their grand escape for a new life. And that experience only comes from the struggle. And it's only when they let go of this kind of, fantasy that they sit down and they finally like, all right, how the hell are we going to do this? And they learn some lessons from that. Oh, it's all about, like, for Mac, it's thrust. They need thrust and stuff like that. And they develop this machine using all of their capacities as a team and all that sort of stuff, rowing together, or even before that, like making the machine itself, and they row together and they kind of get out. And that's kind of like this strange allegory, I would say, for kind of a socialist revolution, because they're kind of using the technological understanding and the progress of the farm and building this flying machine, which it's like the personification of an actual chicken. Like it's, it flaps and it's like shaped like a bird and all that sort of stuff. But they don't learn how to fly individually. They fly out of that place as a unit in this singular, massive wooden chicken thing. And so it's pretty blatantly obvious that, like, yes, they fly out of there, but they do it inside this technological advanced machine, and they do it together. It's a lot of solidarity and teamwork.
Yeah, because I would say, like, even when Rocky in the story is far more reactionary, really he ends up being quite integral to the story, and at least like he does actually end up serving his own purpose, even though he was being incredibly selfish. Because the thing is, when I guess they were believing the lie that he could fly, he does quite well to motivate them to becoming more militant. Like in the process of like trying to teach them to fly, they do get used to doing things as a group, even though they were basically individual attempts, as you were kind of saying. But once the
fairy tale is gone.
Yeah, once the fairy tale is gone, they basically were like, okay, and this is also this is where the part of the story which is also really important, because right after they find out the fairy tale was a complete lie, that's also the part where the Mr. Tweedy, like, they've kind of realized that they're going to be made into pies, so they know that they're against the clock, and that actually kind of galvanizes them to be like, hey, if we give up, that's it for us. We're all pies. So we, you know what, Ginger? Maybe you were right. Let's do it your way. And then everyone kind of comes together and they're like, you know what? If we physically cannot fly, then let's make something that can fly for us. And I would say it's the combination of Rocky, at least making them work as a group. It maybe not as together, but at least doing them with drills so they at least got used to working as a team. But then once they were confronted with a scenario where they definitely had to work as a team, and also got to the point where, well, they adopted Ginger's philosophy and like revolutionary further, then they were in the right place to be like, okay, we're on the clock here, girls. Let's make a machine so we can get out of here.
Yeah, so Rocky's character is very important in that regard. Like, kind of, he does make them kind of work on something. And like I said before, like the biggest lessons are the experience in the struggle. So they had to struggle together. They fail, and that trajectory that they go down is a complete tangent. It sends them off in the wrong direction. But like you said, they're starting to work together, and like kind of they are starting to understand that like there is hope, but they've got to kind of work towards it. Like I said, they're on the wrong trajectory completely, but like they're developing their class consciousness at that point. And like they're being led, by what I described before as a charismatic leader, a cult of the personality type, that is just putting them off on the wrong direction and giving them false hope. But like they're still, gaining that understanding that they need to improve their lot in life and improve themselves to a certain degree in order to achieve betterment, and to achieve some future that they just can't live, or they will never realize in their current circumstances. And like you said, as soon as like industrial capitalism kicks into the full gear for them, and like they realize like how close they are to potentially their demise, they're able to come together quite strongly and just like put everything into gear, um, and make it actually work. Like they really like put things together quite masterfully, and like it's quite funny in the end how they do everything. And I love like the whole time like all of this is going on, like Mr. Tweedy, like it thinks that he's going mad because like you know the chickens are doing stuff, and he's like what he says,
It's all in your head.
it's all in your head.
your
It's
head.
all in your head. But like at one point, like when the actual like the revolutionary moment is underway and stuff like that, and he screams out, "Mrs. Tweedy, the chickens are revolting," and like you know, and she's like, "Yes, finally something we agree on. They are revolting," kind of thing. Like that whole kind of um, scenario it's very crafty. Like the writers of Chicken Run were very clever in the way they put all of that sort of stuff together. How so there's like this managerial class that is very aware of kind of what the working class is doing, and there's a detached capitalist class that are just focused on their profit and their production and all that sort of stuff. They're detached from the reality of what is happening to the working class, and like they're swelling and like change is coming, but they can't get out of their own way to stop that rising revolution. But like Mr. Tweedy keeps seeing stuff. He can see the signs, but he thinks he's crazy, and it's hilarious.
Well, yeah, I guess there's a number of ways you can kind of take that. Like, I think it's a decent interpretation of you know him being like a manager and just completely misinterpreting the situation, or at least ignoring the situation. Like, I think that's a decent interpretation. The way I saw it is that sometimes with revolutions you just need a bit of luck, and like that. What I took out of that was here's like, oh, it's all in your head, it's all in your head. Like that always happened, that running gag always happened at a very key moment in them you know, training to fly, or them stealing some tools, or you know, in order to make the flying machine, or what else they were doing. He would just catch them, but then he knew that Mrs. Tweedy was like, no, that like, you idiots, they're not organized, because that's another important word that makes this quite revolutionary, is that Mrs. Tweedy keeps on telling Mr. Tweedy, you idiots, they're not organized, they're not organizing, they're not scheming, they're just stupid chickens. It's all in your head. Like, it's very obvious from the terminology that this is a very revolutionary tale.
Yeah. The terminology is good, like the use of the word organized, and profits and all that type of stuff. I think they did that deliberately, and they were making a dig at capitalism, and they were trying to turn this into some type of working class upheaval kind of fable. And I think, it's not far-fetched to have a good revolutionary interpretation of this story at all. And like they meld a lot of interesting characters to try and take up key positions in that story. I think the dogs are important as well. They're kind of like the police. So they're the state, or the authorities' violent force. And they're always, especially in the earlier parts of the movie where they're just trying to escape a lot, they're always there to catch the chickens and to throw Ginger repeatedly to throw her in prison, or like in isolation for her misdeeds.
But did you notice that in the beginning, what I found very interesting was in the number of attempts that she did, you notice how the dogs always went straight for Ginger every single time. I found that very interesting, where I think this is where your police analogy probably is at its it's probably has some validity to it because they were always going for the ringleader every single time.
Yeah.
So, which is, let's be honest, it's a very police thing to do.
Yeah.
And that not only that, but yeah, is Mr. Tweedy just a middle manager or like I guess he's kind of a number of things. He's kind of like an old gentry type character. Well, even though he's like a traditional farmer, like I just think the whole talk of like, oh, this farm has been in my family for generations, and I guess him always repeating the "it's all in your head" thing probably also makes him a bit of a middle manager. But I guess the really important question is like maybe one character we've talked about quite a lot, which is Rocky, but also another Rooster character that we haven't really covered that much, which is Fowler. The first question I have is, well, majority of the film, you can claim that Rocky is a reactionary character, but does he actually turn into a revolutionary in the end? And two, what are your thoughts on Fowler? He's a very interesting character.
Yeah, look, I think it is important to kind of have that, like, sage or that old wise kind of character among their ranks. They give the working class kind of a reality check a lot of the time. So you have kind of like you could almost see him as the retired a section of the workforce. He's not laying eggs, but he's in there, guiding them and giving them lessons and all that sort of stuff. But they don't always take him seriously. Actually, a lot of the time they're quite dismissive of him. So it's not like he holds absolute rank and has power over the chickens and stuff like that. A lot of the stuff that he does kind of has this effect that like he thinks he's in control and telling the chickens what to do, but like at the end of the day they're just running around and getting in line when they have to, and like he's got he's got no power over them. He sleeps in a different quarters to them, so he's separated from the working class as well. And like in their moment and their hour of need, or in Ginger's hour of need kind of thing, like she looks to him because he's in the RAF and all that sort of stuff, and she basically says, well, you got to fly this thing. We've made this machine and you're always talking about it. And he basically just looks at her and goes, oh, me, God no, woman. They wouldn't let a chicken fly, in the RAF. This is up to you. And so like it's important. He's just this kind of guiding figure. This, like I said, he represents, I would say, the retired working class. They're there they're living as part of the system. They're still part of the working class, but like they don't really contribute to it as much. They just kind of add a little bit of wisdom here and there. But like again, they're completely dismissive of him whenever they want to be. That big chicken is a bunting. Or
Bunty.
Like
she makes fun of him all the time.
She makes fun of him, and like she's the first, like when they have an all-out brawl, she's the first to like smash him, and like physically check him, which is pretty funny after he slaps her, which is a hilarious scene.
Yeah, but like the thing though is that he ends up being quite integral to the Great Escape. Because like it is true that at first he's like, oh well, they never let chickens pilot in the Royal Air Force, but then Ginger is able to convince him, but Fowler, you have all this experience. You have to be the one that flies this. You know how, and then eventually he kind of steps up to the plate. But that's all after he sees all the work that people have put in, and also that I guess there's an element of him doing it for his own benefit, because like if they don't fly out of there, they're kind of all dead.
Yeah.
So he eventually kind of takes the call of him discussing all of these old stories. He eventually, as I guess the expert, fulfills his part in the Revolutionary Act, which I think is very important. But I think I'm on the fence with whether Rocky ends up being a revolutionary figure, because you could claim that he is a revolutionary figure in the sense of he does like a Trotsky-esque at the very last minute decides to side with the revolution and saves them, because the thing is he does come in at the last minute, helps Ginger put up the ramp up again, and then
I wouldn't call that revolutionary. That's just a sign of opportunism. Like he's there in the right time, the right place again. Like, don't get me wrong, like opportunists can be very helpful, but they are opportunists at the end of the day. So like if he finds an opportune moment to help out the revolutionary cause, then he's still an opportunist. He's just kind of like on the right side of the fence this time, as opposed to being on on like the bad side or something like that. So like I would say he's not revolutionary in that sense because he never overcomes his own kind of issues, in the sense that like he has told them that he is able to fly, and he lied about that, and like he even leaves when he departs them that little end of the poster which shows the truth about kind of his situation. He's not coming to terms with that in the sense that like he admits to it, but like he doesn't resolve that element of his character. He doesn't learn how to fly or like, find his own cannon so he can shoot people out of it and help them and stuff like that. Like he comes back out of a sense of guilt, I believe, because he finally sees that poster of Mrs. Tweedy's pies, and like it becomes too overwhelming for him to have to live with that. And he comes back again just at an opportune moment so he can help Ginger before she's consumed by the pie making machine. Is that the...
Oh no! That the pie making machine moment, that was when he went and he was actually being quite heroic. That was like in the middle. No, I would think it was just about halfway through the movie where Ginger's being taken to be test.
That's
like,
right.
Basically, the
and
test
they
run.
asked him to fly up there, and he's like, "Oh no, the wing's not ready yet." And then he jumps over the fence, like goes off the power line and all that sort of stuff into the machine.
But but you are right in the sense of Mr. Tweedy he basically had been bound together, and he knocks down the ramp.
That's right.
And Ginger's going to fix it, but then I think
she's not strong enough, and like with the two of them, they're able to push it up again.
Yeah, exactly. Because he jumps over with his bike, and it hits Mr. Tweedy, and then they do that together. And you are correct in the sense of, he does his heroic act. It may be heroic, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's revolutionary. Like I was saying, I think you could make arguments for both ways, but I think I feel more comfortable with him just being an opportunist rather than a revolutionary.
I like the fact that he's American. I love that because, like, I don't think his character is revolutionary at all in that sense, and I think the British are playing a joke there to talk about the opportunistic nature of Americans, especially Americans that go out and like travel the world and all that sort of stuff. They're there just for a good time, and they've got no investment really in the game or the lot in life of all of the other countries that they go out and they're affecting with their kind of their outreach and all that sort of stuff. They're just kind of being Yanks, as Fowler calls them, calls him or refers to him like constantly in that movie. He's not really invested in what they're doing. If anything, he comes back because he falls in love with Ginger.
Yes.
He's not there because he's just like, oh, look, I've got to save the chickens.
Well, yes. And though...
I think.
Yeah, but that could be... It would be an interesting thought, though, because as probably the listeners or the viewers know, Part 2 is coming out this year, and it's part of the reason why we're discussing this today, is that it was announced this year that Chicken Run 2 was coming out. So we thought we'd cover the original film back in 2000. But yeah, well, maybe like I don't really know too much about the new one. Maybe that might be Rocky's revolutionary story. Who knows?
Yeah, we might see that. There's one other thing that I just like wanted to point out because it's the funniest joke in the movie for me. There's many funny moments, but like, one of the chickens, just when they make the pie machine or they're getting ready to have the pie factory at full capacity, one of the chickens fails to lay eggs, and they pick her up and they weigh her and they put her back down again. She thinks she's going to be killed because she hasn't been laying, but they don't care about eggs at that point. And they're like, "Oh, are you okay?" And she goes, "Oh, my life flashed before my eyes. It was really boring." And like, it's a really funny moment, but like, there's a really deep kind of, Marxist kind of anti-capitalist viewpoint right there. That like, she's spent her life working and toiling for somebody else, somebody else's direction, and for somebody else's profit. And she has a life-threatening situation where, like, you hear many people describe that, like, in those moments, your life like kind of actually flashes before your eyes. You see all of this stuff in a split second, and her description of it is it's boring. Nothing has happened for her. And there's like this really important message in that, like, really funny statement there, that like they haven't experienced anything, and because they've just been trapped in this like weird and depressive machine that's larger than them, and all they do is just produce for somebody else's gain, and that is a really unfulfilling life. And that's why it's so important, even if they don't all realize it, that you have someone like Ginger, a true revolutionary at heart, that is really trying to push for people's liberation and their individual freedom, so they can actually live a life that's worth having for a split second, a flashback on, so you can at least know that, like, if it is your time to go right now, that you've had some enjoyment and some fulfillment in your life. Because up until that point, when all of this other stuff goes crazy, Rocky comes in and they start, fighting for their existence, they have absolutely nothing to show for it, those chickens. Like, zero.
Yes.
Zero.
I think this film does a really good job of showing you the various different types of characters in a revolutionary story. So you have Ginger as the optimistic revolutionary. You have Mac as the pragmatist revolutionary. So like, how are we going to do this? What's the plan? How are we going to do this? Well, blah 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 blah. Then Babs, which was basically the chicken that you were referring, which you were referring to. I think she's a very neutral character that kind of just goes with the flow, and she's basically there for laughs. Then you have your much more optimistic reactionary, which is Rocky Road. So the individualist who's basically an opportunist, and then you have the pragmatist reactionary, which is Bunty, where like she's the roadblock for a majority of it, and it's like, oh, this doesn't work, then why don't we just go back to being individuals and being cogs in the machine, because that's what we know, that's what we do. And this movie is very good at explaining like all the different parts of a revolutionary story and how they clash and how they interact.
Yeah, it does it very well, and it lends itself very easily to revolutionary interpretation. And like, for all of you out there that have kids, or even if you, I don't know, have young people that make sure that they watch this movie and ingrain it within them for a young age, so they grow up to be staunch revolutionaries.
Okay, with that, I think that's a good point to finish on. So, the very last point is, what's that synthwave art? So this week, is
it's
an interesting
crazy.
one. So I think this is the best AI art we've had thus far.
Yeah.
So the prompt is
Shamanistic chicken.
yeah, it gave me that, but the prompt was literally revolutionary chicken run escaping from the camp.
Wow.
And you can see the camp in the background, and obviously, but like they have the chickens. But yeah, I don't know what's going on with the shaman at the front.
Yeah, it's interesting, very interesting, and like the chickens all kind of look the same, which is interesting in the background, and they're all looking to the same direction. But this, very striking and scary looking character at the front. I'm not sure what that's about, and they look like they've got human feet. Which is strange. Yeah, it's strange, but we'll take it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And with that, thank you everyone for watching, and remember to keep thinking and keep learning. And to sign us off, I'll leave it to you, MysterE.
Thank you very much, 4AS, and to all of you out there, please remember, I am, you are, we are a MysterE.